JJ, the CPA here. Hope you're doing well. Hey, thanks for tuning in. I want to do a update here June 2nd on the PPP Flexibility Act. The Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, out of chamber today, hours ago, indicated that they really feel like in the Senate, they're going to go for the House version. The House version of this PPP Flexibility Act was passed basically unanimously. And so with the Senate, they were considering some other provisions. And while the Senate has not voted on it as of the time that this video was released, it sounds very likely. So I wanted to talk a little bit further about what is in, I'm going to still call it the House version of the PPP Flexibility Act. And the last item, or second to the last item here, I know has created some concern for some, but I want to address that. But the biggest thing here is that you would be able to apply, for those that haven't, for the Paycheck Protection Program until 12/31/2020. Currently, you have to apply for it on or before June 30. So it expands that. There's about $100 billion left. The small banks, small credit unions have definitely an edge on that. And then the covered period would be 24 weeks. Right now, the covered period is 8 weeks. So you only have 8 weeks to spend your PPP funds on the qualified expenses. This would expand that covered period to 24 weeks. So we do know that this will have some change to the PPP loan forgiveness application. One of the things that's interesting is that you can elect to still go with the 8 weeks, meaning if you're already there, I've got clients that have already met the 8 weeks. They're good to go. They might just be able to put the loan forgiveness application in. However, if they are not at full forgiveness, what does that mean? They haven't been able to spend all the money, or for whatever reason, based on these calculations and comparisons, even though they spent the money and they did it properly, they're not achieving full forgiveness. And I don't mean about pulling shenanigans, but if you have a 24-week period, that's a lot more time, of course, to be able to, first of all, spend all of the money properly on what it is that you need, but then that gives you more time to make up for any FTE or salary reductions, which leads into the next two things that are huge. So the deadline to rehire and reverse salary cuts would be now 12/31/2020. This is assumed that it's put into law as is. Right now, you have to rehire and reverse salary cuts by June 30, on or before. Well, we're in June now. There's definitely the possibility that there's going to be businesses that maybe still haven't even opened. So how are they going to reverse some of that? Remember, with the PPP, the money that is taken, okay, the money that you've received, you're supposed to pay the employees whether you're open or not. However, we know that we can have circumstances where the employee left, the employee's on PUA, they won't come back, the business isn't open, and it's not going to need as many employees when it does open. There's also the possibilities leading into this other one is that there is an exemption that would be allowed for borrowers from the loan forgiveness reduction due to less employees. And so if they can show the reason that they had less employees was due to reasonable cause between February 15th of this year and 12/31/2020, they can show reasonable cause why they have less employees, right? Could be a number of reasons, which most likely would first start with the fact that maybe they weren't able to fully recover. Maybe they had to close their doors. Maybe they had to make changes to their locations or how many stores they had because of all of this. So there's a number of reasons, but in essence, the exemption would allow a borrower to indicate, here's why I'm not able to replace the number of employees, so that FTE calculation would still be in play, but there might be a way to exempt somebody, because that one's huge. I did a video on it. It would still exist, but we might see that there's an exemption from it. But whatever reduction you have in your workforce has a direct and devastating effect to the amount of loan forgiveness. So be great to have an exemption on that. And then down below, right here, 60% requirement for payroll. Does it mean all or nothing? Well, let's wait and see what the law is going to actually state. And I know that several have commented that when you review the bill, it sure seems as there is a cliff. Well, that language has always been in the CARES Act, that there's a 75% requirement currently, okay? That has turned out to be, though, that even though it says at least 75% in payroll, it's not been an all or nothing, and I don't interpret it that it will become an all or nothing. And the reason why is that it's always been worded, okay, in a way that on its face and way you read it in the law, that if you don't spend at least 75%, you're not going to achieve full forgiveness. Well, that is true because you're only going to get forgiveness to the extent of what you spend. But if you don't spend at least 75%, then you're not going to achieve full forgiveness, but it doesn't mean now none of it's forgiven. It's never been an all or nothing. And when you go through the loan application and you go through the SBA guidelines, it is made clear that in essence, the purpose of that 75% language, okay, is to also show the inverse, that not more than 25% currently, June 2nd, this has not been signed into law, but currently you cannot spend more than 25% on non-payroll costs. With what the House has put together with a 60% requirement on payroll, really what that is all about is the inverse. That means that up to 40% of the PPP loan can be used on non-payroll qualified expenses, the rent, the utilities, the interest, and by the way, there would be 24 weeks of a covered period to be able to use those funds. So I understand that when you read the bill, it sounds like there's a cliff. It sounds like, well, if you don't use at least 60%, you're not going to achieve full forgiveness. So let's just think about this. That is correct, but it doesn't mean if you don't achieve the 75% currently, or what could potentially be the 60%, it does not mean that if you don't reach 60%, that none of it is going to be forgiven. So definitely understand the, maybe I don't want to call it misinterpretation, but I definitely understand the interpretation of being that there's a cliff. Just saying again, repeating myself, there's always been that language that makes it sound like a cliff. You go through the loan application, you go through the guidelines, and that's not the case. All that would change here is that instead of 75%, it would be 60%. And more importantly, that would allow up to 40% on the non-payroll. The other aspect of the PPP Forgiveness or Flexibility Act is that there would be 5 years to repay versus 2. So the bottom line on the PPP Flexibility Act is it to make it easier. It's not to provide any additional hardships. I'm not reading anything in here that's a negative. I'm not seeing anything in here that goes holy smackaroonies. I can't believe that they have that now, okay? If we've always had the opportunity of spending for payroll and getting forgiven what we properly spent on payroll forgiven without achieving the full 75%, this is not going to include, and it does not include, a provision that now all of a sudden makes it, if you don't spend at least 60% on payroll, then none of it is forgiven. Not to mention if you've got 24 weeks to spend it. Now, if you got the loan and you didn't have any payroll and you got it incorrectly, well, I mean, obviously you're not going to get any of it forgiven, and it doesn't have anything to do with not achieving 60%. It's due to the fact that you didn't get it correctly. And that might have been the case because of misinterpretations, or there wasn't enough SBA guidelines in the beginning. Now, what does this mean for the self-employed? Well, for the self-employed, right, we still have the provision that doesn't matter about the 8 weeks or the 24 weeks, or does it? Because we know that we have the amount of line 31 divided by 52 times 8. This would be that line 52 divided by, or that line 31, line 31 of Schedule C divided by 52, and I would lead to think that it would lead to then 24 weeks instead of 8. So it'd be line 31 divided by 52 times 24 weeks, which obviously increases even further the amount of the loan forgiveness being near automatic. And if you run the numbers, it might just make it straight up all forgivable. And for the self-employed, it's simple as can be. So we are going to need to wait until it's put into law, and then we're going to need to wait for the SBA guidelines to come out with further interpretations related to that. But I did want to give an additional PPP Flexibility Act update because of the fact that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has indicated, coming out of chamber today, they think the Senate's just going to go ahead and vote on this House bill. And typically, if the Senate's going to vote on a House bill and doesn't have really any changes to it, now they can make some modifications and then the House goes back and votes on it, which is still potentially the case. But in essence, if they're just going to put the House bill up for vote, typically that means they're going to vote on whatever the House has put together and unanimously approved in this set of circumstances. So let's wait and see. We know we got a lot of other things going on in the world that are more important than PPP right now. So hopefully everybody's doing okay with that. And I don't know if the Senate will vote on it this week. Sounds like they are. But I know there's more important things to be taken care of that they may want to somehow address across the nation and then address this. But at the end of the day, I see nothing but good news as it relates to the PPP Flexibility Act. All right, hey, thanks for tuning in. I'd really appreciate it. And then please subscribe. I would really appreciate if you just take a minute and do that. And then don't you ever forget, you've never met a CPA quite like me. All right, have a great one.